An 18-year-old girl with a dark secret. A love triangle takes a deadly turn. But just who committed the crime? This is the true story of Rosa White. Rosa White was the all-American small-town girl. Beautiful and just 18 years old, with her entire life in front of her. Yet, the shocking events that took place in 1904 would soon thrust her into the national spotlight, stunning the entire world, in what remains one of the greatest mysteries to ever happen in the Appalachian Mountains. Logan County, West Virginia, a rugged and isolated community, cradled by towering mountains on every side. This land, steeped in history and shadowed by legend, remained untouched by the outside world for much of its early existence. The area was so remote that even the great iron horse of the 19th century, the railroad, failed to carve a path through its rugged terrain until well after 1900. The steep ridges and narrow hollers acted as natural barriers, preserving the region's solitude and way of life. Even in modern times, no interstates or expressways have managed to penetrate through its wilderness. Instead, a sparse network of winding, narrow roads twist and turns like veins through the rugged hills, connecting scattered mountaineers who still follow in the footsteps of generations past. This is the land that bore witness to one of America's most infamous feuds, the Hatfields and McCoys, a place where family loyalties ran as deep as the coal veins, and grudges smoldered as fiercely as the fires in the miners' lanterns. Indeed, it's always been a place of stalwart men who lived by the code of the mountains. You never mess with another man's family or his property. Since there was no real law to speak of, most men handled disagreements the old-fashioned way, with gunpowder and lead. It was here that Henry White made his home on Crawley's Creek, just outside of Chapmanville. His ancestors were some of the earliest settlers in this section, and by 1904, the surname White was highly respected, and anyone who bared his last name came from this prominent family. Like most folks, Mr. White had several children. After all, a man needed all the help he could get, maintaining the crops and the animals. As was common practice during this time period, children would be given a small portion of the farm once they were old enough to start their own families. And as you might imagine, after several generations of this, each family in these hills had grown to the size of a small army. In this way, they didn't need the law. That's right, they protected one another's interest against any potential rivals or nosy lawmen alike. Yet, for all the strong boys Mr. White had fathered, it was his daughter, Rosa, who was his pride and joy. Now 18 years old, she had grown up a free spirit on her father's farm, with a love for riding horses and helping her mother around the homestead. Unlike her brothers, who had spent their entire childhood learning how to farm, Rosa had attended primary school, where she developed a love for reading, and even attended a girls' finishing school, where she learned how to engage in the art of conversation on topics like politics and literature. And although Rosa spent her days locked away in the West Virginia mountains, she spent many of her nights reading her favorite authors, Mark Twain and Jack London.
I've been on this gospel way for many, many days, but I know it won't be long till I am gone. And if the Lord would come tonight, I'd be on a one-way flight, just a twinkling of an eye away from home.
But perhaps Rosa loved nothing more than to read to the children during Sunday school each week down at the Baptist church. Well, at least this had been Rosa's favorite time of the week. The small whitewashed building stood as the heart of the community, not only as a place of worship, but also as the hub of social life. For the teenagers of Crawley's Creek, Sunday service offered more than preaching and singing. For them, it was one of the few chances they got for courting. Dresses were pressed and hair was carefully combed. And during each service, shy glances were exchanged across the pews. It was there, inside of the church walls, beneath the flickering glow of oil lamps, that Rosa first laid eyes on Fred Stratton. Like Rosa, Fred came from a prominent farming family, and the match between the two seemed as natural as the seasons that guided their lives. And for the past 2 years, Fred had walked Rosa home from church, even though this young Romeo lived nearly 10 miles from his love. Fred would spend nearly every Sunday afternoon perched on the porch swing beside Rosa, and with her father's blessing too. The mountain boy had never loved anyone like Rosa. Oh, she was all he ever wanted, and more. And since meeting her, he had been swept away and lived every moment of his life for her. Folks on Crawley's Creek were certain it was only a matter of time before wedding bells would be ringing. That's just the way things worked in the mountains. Steady courtships led to strong marriages, and strong marriages built the kind of families that thrived in the hard country. Yet, by the winter of 1904, something had shifted between the two. Whispers began to swirl like snowflakes that dusted the holler, and curious eyes noticed that Fred was no longer walking Rosa home after church, and her seat on that porch swing was now empty. For her part, Rosa refused to speak of what had caused the sudden split. She would brush off her family's questions with a forced smile. Fred, on the other hand, carried his heartbreak openly, and those who knew him said that he was devastated, and it was something that he couldn't seem to shake. Whatever had come between the two had set all the tongues on Crawley's Creek to wagging. But I tell you right now, no one was prepared for what happened next.
Give someone you love the gift of old-fashioned storytelling today. 2 volumes that'll make your heart smile. Click the link below or visit the appalachianstoryteller.com to order your copies today.
By December of 1904, 18-year-old Rosa White had broken off her 2-year relationship with Fred Stratton. Suddenly, every eligible bachelor was vying for the mountain girl's attention and hoping that they could win her affection. But for her part, Rosa had returned her focus to helping the family out around the farm. Romance seemed to be better left in the books that she read. Now, it was way too dramatic in real life. You know how messy love can be. However, things are never quite what they seem to be in these mountains, and many have questioned throughout the years if it's truly possible to know what secrets are locked away in a woman's heart. And what of a man whose love has been rejected? What is he really capable of? If he couldn't have Rosa, would he really stand by and wait for her to fall in love with another man? Well, as it turns out, those are the questions we must try and answer. But first, I must warn you, what happens next is a little rough. The morning of December 17th was cold, and it was a Friday. It had snowed all night the night before. Rosa spent the day with her family. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, until strangely, after supper, she told her ma and pa that she was going out for a walk. It was nearly sunset, but she assured them that she would only be out a little while. And with that, she walked out the front door and disappeared into the cold mountain air. Hours went by. It had been dark for a long time, but there was no sign of Rosa. Perhaps she had stopped at a neighbor's house for the night. No, but that was highly unlike her. She always told her parents of her comings and goings. Her father became concerned, and he searched for her for nearly an hour in the darkness. But it was a moonless night, and visibility was so poor he would have to wait until the break of day to resume the search. By dawn, Mr. White had gathered a half-dozen men and horses, and the mountaineers immediately set out following Rosa's tracks in the snow for nearly a mile, when suddenly there appeared an additional set of tracks walking in the opposite direction. The men paused to examine the area before proceeding, and just then one man called out, "Boys, what's that over there?" Just off the trail in a thicket of mountain laurel was a 2-pound clinching iron, a tool used for woodworking, and even more concerning, there seemed to be several specks of red in the snow surrounding it. Mr. White picked it up, and that's when the men realized that the tool was covered in blood. Frantic, the men scoured the entire area, but there was nothing else to be found, and Rosa's footprints were still there in the snow, walking away from it. Mr. White started to panic, and he ran as fast as he could, following the footprints for nearly 200 yards, before he gasped and screamed with such force that it echoed from the surrounding mountain walls. There before him was a gruesome trail of blood, and there were so many prints in the snow, it was impossible to make out how many people there were. But there was blood everywhere, and there in the distance, laying motionless, was the body of Rosa White. It was clear that she had fought viciously for her life, but whoever had committed this had done so with brutal malice. Rosa's head was almost severed from her body, and there in the snow, just a few feet away, was the weapon, a razor blade with the initials F.S. carved into the handle. Police discovered that the clinching iron had been purchased the day of the crime down in Chapmanville, and the store owner was certain of the man who purchased it, and that man was Fred Stratton. Word spread like wildfire all over the county, and a race ensued between law enforcement and a large posse of mountain men looking for the man with the initials F.S., Fred Stratton. Yet, mysteriously, Fred wasn't at his home, and for 2 days, he was the most wanted man in West Virginia. But lucky for him, the law found him before the mountaineers did. The boy surrendered without resistance and staunchly maintained his innocence to the crime. He lived 10 miles away, and he had been at home during the crime. It was impossible that he did it. However, that razor blade with his initials was enough evidence for the lawmen, so they quickly jailed him in Logan as anger spread throughout the community. And within a day, the law was forced to move him to a jail 20 miles away for fear of mob violence. All the while, Fred maintained his innocence. It seems like an open and closed case, right? But not so fast. Buckle up, folks. This one's about to get wild. Poor Rosa. Her family was completely devastated, and suddenly her story was being flashed all across America in front-page headlines. Meanwhile, Rosa's body was taken back to the medical examiner's office, and that's when a seemingly open and shut case took a sudden turn. That's when it was discovered that Rosa had, in fact, taken a secret to the grave. That's right, Rosa was pregnant. Was this the reason for the breakup with Fred? Or was it possible that there might be someone else involved? Enter into this story the Stalins family, another powerful family with generational power. They owned substantial tracts of land in Logan County and had influence in political affairs as well. The two most prominent members of the Stalins family were brothers who had a reputation of combining forces against any and all potential threats to their way of life. The eldest brother was Ballard Stalins, and he was a God-fearing man who was also a deacon down at the Baptist church. He was the first one there, each and every time the door is open, eager to see another soul won for the kingdom of the Lord. He was also a newly married man, just barely back from his honeymoon, and already rumored to be making a run at political office during the next election. Ballard ran the general store down in Chapmanville, and his only connection to Rosa White thus far was his testimony to police that he sold the clinching iron to Fred Stratton the day before it was found at Rosa's crime scene. Yet, in a stunning turn of events, Fred Stratton had summoned the sheriff to his cell, where he promised to give a full confession of what really happened to Rosa. And as detectives gathered to hear Fred's confession, he stunned everyone by stating that the person who in fact killed Rosa was none other than Ballard Stalins' younger brother, Floyd Stalins. According to Fred, Ballard had falsely accused him of purchasing the clinching iron to cover for his younger brother. And as for that razor blade found at the crime scene, it wasn't Fred Stratton's initials on it. Those were the initials of Floyd Stalins. The plot thickens. But wait a minute. There was no evidence that Rosa had ever even met Floyd Stalins. But soon, folks started talking about that one incident down at the church that several townsfolk had witnessed a few weeks before Rosa's death. Curiously, on the way out of church, Ballard Stalins' wife was seen in what appeared to be a heated argument with Rosa. Investigators quickly brought in Floyd and Ballard Stalins for questioning, but each man was solid as a rock in their defense and alibi. After all, this was only a desperate attempt by Fred to pin his guilt on someone else just because of the coincidence of their matching initials. But authorities weren't so sure, so they decided to bring in Miss Stalins to hear what she had to say. Her disposition struck the lawmen as peculiar, and there was just something about her. It was almost like she was hiding something. So acting on a hunch, they turned up the heat in their interrogation, threatening to jail her for withholding evidence. It was then that the newly married woman made a stunning confession.
So what if my husband had a one-night stand with Rosa White? It was before we were married. It was a mistake. And besides that doesn't make him the father of her baby.
Police were baffled. Had Rosa had a secret affair with Ballard Stalins? And had his brother Floyd killed Rosa to save his brother's reputation as a newly married man? And what about Fred? Why had he disappeared for those 2 solid days at exactly the time the crime was committed? Just who had killed Rosa White? Well, in the law's mind, there was only one way to find out. Try all 4 of them for first-degree murder and let a jury decide. By February of 1905, the Logan County Courthouse was jam-packed with hundreds of spectators gathered to watch the trial of the century. 4 separate people would be on trial for the murder of Rosa White. Had Fred Stratton killed her for leaving him, or had Floyd Stalins killed her to protect his brother's reputation? And for that matter, had Ballard Stalins and his wife committed the evil deed? Or even more sinister, had Miss Stalins done it herself? And I tell you, it was high drama in Logan County and in newspapers all around the world as the trial got underway. All 4 defendants were kept in jail in the months leading up to the trial. And once the trial was underway, all 4 defendants drew straws to see who would be tried first. And the man who drew the shortest straw was Floyd Stalins. On the first day of Floyd's trial, it became clear that the state prosecution was ill prepared. All they had was circumstantial evidence against Floyd. And meanwhile, Floyd had hired the 3 most powerful attorneys in all of West Virginia to defend him. All day long, the prosecution laid out its case. Murmurs and whispers filled the courtroom as it became clear that the state had no witnesses other than Rosa's father, who testified that in the weeks leading up to the crime, his daughter had confided in him that she had been having a reoccurring nightmare, that she would be murdered. But in her dream, she could never see the face of the killer. As chilling as that testimony was, it still offered no clue to who committed the act. And when the prosecution rested its case against Floyd Stalins, newspapers across the nation ran headlines that Floyd would be acquitted due to no evidence against him. On the second day of the trial, the defense had 40 witnesses available to testify that Floyd Stalins was over 20 miles away from the crime scene the day Rosa was killed. However, the defense was so sure that Floyd would be acquitted, they declined to put a single person on the stand and stated to the judge and jury that no evidence had been presented against Mr. Stalins. Therefore, they rested their case and motioned for a dismissal. But the judge, he ruled against them, and in turn put the defendant's fate into the hands of the 12 men of the jury. 3 hours later, they returned with a verdict. We, the jury, find Floyd Stalins guilty of first-degree murder of Rosa White and recommend a punishment of life in prison. As surprising as the verdict against Floyd was, it's what happened next that remains one of the most baffling legal cases to this very day. You see, Logan County, West Virginia didn't have the money to try the next 3 defendants. And the prosecution, they were satisfied that at least one of them were found guilty. Shockingly, Ballard Stalins and his wife were never even tried, and neither was Rosa's longtime boyfriend, Fred Stratton. And several years later, once this story had faded from the national headlines, Floyd Stalins' lawyers petitioned the West Virginia Attorney General's office for the release of Floyd from prison. And, without any questions, he walked out a free man. Wow, there's a lot to unpack here. What about you, my friend? Whose initials do you think were really on that razor blade? Who had the motive to commit the crime? Just who really killed Rosa White? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Until next time, thanks for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe for more true stories from Appalachia's past.